full room. Never in doubt. My name is Tom Hickey. I work for the Pew Charitable Trusts, who, alongside Conservation International, I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this evening's panel on the role of coastal blue carbon ecosystems in NDCs and other national level policy instruments. A discussion that we hope is very timely on a couple of levels. Firstly, as I doubt anyone in this room doesn't know, tomorrow is the first in-person, or as Joe has started saying, 3D Ocean Climate Dialogue. And while we have the opportunity, no small amount of thanks to Joe and Jeremy for all their labours there. The dialogue, of course, is not limited to nature-based solutions and blue carbon. There must be equal, or frankly, if not more, emphasis on technical solutions, renewable shipping and such not. But the dialogue marks another very important milestone in how we think about nature-based solutions in this place, the strengths and opportunities of the current framework and the opportunities there to improve that, not just here, but across conventions, across departments, across financial frameworks. And we're hopeful that the dialogue will be a very important part of scaling that discussion. Secondly, the discourse around these three ecosystems, I think it's fair to say, has moved on significantly in recent years. We all know that these three blue carbon ecosystems, salt marshes, mangroves and seagrasses, are at the forefront of growing interest in the broader potential of nature-based solutions, partly because they remain the only three with IPCC-approved mitigation guidance, but also because their benefits to the climate, but also people and nature extend far beyond carbon, shoreline defence, water filtration, supporting resilient livelihoods. So many of us, I know, have been sat in these places, and in fact in this very room, talking about the potential of these ecosystems. But now we're starting to see them in NDCs, in national strategies, in plans. And within that, Pew has been particularly pleased to work with the governments of Costa Rica, Belize and Seychelles through the last NDC cycle, and also very pleased to let people know this evening that we'll be expanding that programme of work to a further 5 countries in the next 4 years, which is both very exciting and a terrifyingly large task. But across those efforts, and I think many others in this room, we're starting to move away from talking about potential to actual action, and more importantly, experience. And within that experience, we have that golden quality of being able to share key learnings with the whole range of people and stakeholders that are interested in how we scale this up. So, across this panel, we have a whole breadth of very interesting perspectives on that transition. We have representatives from coordination groups, from caucuses, Angelique Papunu at AOSIS, from national governments, Mr. Kushal Raj from the government of Fiji, from not just the UK government, but the COP26 presidency and Steph Ockenden, Joachim Leit, who works for the NCD Partnership and is frankly stuck right in the middle of how we translate ambition into action and the enabling partnerships necessary, and Joe Post, who's not had an awful lot to do for the last 12 months, save only to organise, I think, what is an absolute milestone in the consideration of ocean climate in this place. And mercifully from you, that's all you're going to hear from me. You're going to hear a lot more from the panel. Each will have the opportunity to make some opening remarks on this area, why they're interested in that perspective, and thereafter we'll move to some moderated Q&A. So it's just a huge thank you from me to the panellists, a huge thank you from me for you all being here. And Angelique, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tom. Always a pleasure to be on a panel moderated by you. Good evening, everyone. So let me just pull up my speaking notes here. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I remember the days when I was on a country delegation and we were friends of many different ocean action groups and just caucusing about how we're actually going to make this happen, how we're going to make it a reality. And it's so great to be in the room with so many people who, A, help to make it a reality, but I think it has so much more potential. So thinking about how do we make this only a first step and how do we see it grow? Just like to clarify, I'm a lawyer by profession, so I always add the fine details. So I'm from the Alliance of Small Island States. I'm a policy advisor there, but certainly my remarks are not on behalf of AOSIS. We don't have a position on nature-based solutions just yet. I guess things to look forward to or things to come. But certainly I'm hopeful that I can share some experiences from small island developing states, and you'll hear, of course, from Kushal, colleague and friend, on the Fiji experience as well. I guess the last caveat is, forgive me for my focus on the Seychelles. I'm from the Seychelles, so inevitably my knowledge there is more prominent. So small island developing states, or large ocean states, as we are often now more accurately referred to, are at the forefront of the battle against climate change. But when thinking about the ocean, it's not only thinking about the impacts that the ocean faces, but also thinking about how the ocean can serve as a solution. And many island nations are blessed with blue carbon ecosystems, many of them being mangroves and seagrass meadows. And of course, these coastal wetlands are the perfect examples of nature-based solutions and an example of a specific marine action that a state can take that will aid the fight against climate change. They have significant value. We've spoken a lot about this, about the triple value ecosystem. They have adaptation values, buffering our shorelines against the impacts of increasingly erratic weather patterns and coastal erosion. Through their protection, we increase the resilience of our planet to climate impacts, sequestering and storing predominantly within their soils a significant amount of carbon. As well as fisheries, you name it. You name it. There are many benefits to these nature-based solutions. So I think from here, Tom has already iterated about its recognition by the IPCC. But one of the things that I'd like to share is the experience of the Seychelles. So together in a consortium of partnerships, I'd like to call it, the government of Seychelles, the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, the University of Seychelles, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Nature Conservancy, University of Oxford, local NGOs on the ground, the Seychelles began a process of integrating blue carbon within its NDCs about a year ago. And this involved a series of work that looked at what scientific work needed to be done. Also looking at it from a very climate technical angle. Is it adaptation? Is it mitigation? Many of these conversations ensued. And of course, if some of you had had the chance to read the Seychelles' updated NDC, we've included it in both the adaptation and mitigation, and also because we appreciate its relevance and importance in its adaptation values. The science has involved doing a mapping of seagrass meadows across the entire EEZ of the Seychelles. We're literally a large ocean state. Our EEZ is 1.4 million kilometers square. We can go into the details of the science, but Tom is here for the science, not me. So the other aspect is with this support that we got from different partners, it provided the security to government that we had the support to undertake this baseline assessment, the confidence that we could work towards what we needed to do once we placed it into our NDCs. And that allowed a very ambitious commitment to be made by the Seychelles government. So when we updated our NDCs, we have a commitment by the government of Seychelles to protect 50% of all seagrass coastal wetlands by 2025 and 100% by 2030 on condition of financing being provided. The other aspect that I always like to touch about, and this is perhaps a favorite story coming out of the Seychelles, is that we appreciated that level of commitment requires society support, local community support. So they became, or they are, part of the NDC process, but in particular with regards to this commitment. And one of the biggest manifestations around this particular commitment is prior to this exercise, there wasn't actually a Seychelles Creole word for seagrass. Really speaking to the fact that if you don't value something, why name it? So in undertaking this process, we began a process of sort of crowdsourcing names for seagrass in our local language. And that involved engaging communities of what seagrass does, what they think they should have it called. And a lot of this was being led by fishers. And fishers, of course, had their sort of dialect of how they referred to seagrass. But it was a couple of months ago that now those words are actually in the Seychelles Dictionary as officially recognized words for seagrass within the Seychelles Creole Dictionary. Really showing that now sort of the local communities are able to assign that importance by actually being able to have a word to refer to them. But my last point is I have to be candid. I think it's important to always be transparent in this process. One of the things that we know from a small island developing state perspective, yes, this was possible with partnership, but it was also necessary that we had funding. Such exercises are often very costly. And it's important to be aware of that up front. And these often may serve as a challenge for small island developing states. And thinking about who to partner with is obviously very critical. The second one is if you place it under mitigation, there's perhaps capacity building requirements to be able to include these in your carbon inventories and to also be able to continue monitoring them over time. Those MRVs, sorry to use the acronyms of this space, but I hope you're monitoring, review, and verification. The MRVs process is also costly, being able to keep track of how your seagrass, for example, is moving over time, over seasons, and so on. And finally, governance is always really tricky when it comes to blue carbon. We have a Ministry of Environment, we have a Ministry of Blue Economy. So you can imagine the tug of war, if you like, that can sometimes be involved in blue carbon, but certainly discussions that are to come. And hopefully many of these dialogues can also serve to inspire parties, developing countries, not only looking at the models that Pew has worked with, but then saying, how can we work how can we work from their examples to make it work for our different contexts? So I'll leave it there, but hopefully just an insight from a small island developing state reflecting on the potential for other small island developing states. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Angelique. And I can attest that is a truly awesome partnership, which was, I think, conceived around the corner in the cafeteria about 3 years ago. And had you said at that point that we would be working with the Institute of Seychelles Creole to develop a lexicon for seagrass, I'd probably have laughed at you. So there are lots of technical research and policy learnings that we can take from these projects, but I think it's borne out there that there's no substitute for the actual experience of doing so. Kushal, you have the floor.
Thank you, and it's certainly difficult to speak after a PhD candidate and an IOC's rep on blue carbon of the ocean. So, with that, I will keep it brief. I just want to discuss, Fijis perspective and a case in terms of, blue carbon ecosystems. Of course, Fiji, in the Pacific falls slightly behind after PNG and the Solomon Islands in terms of the amount or cover of mangrove ecosystems. We have over 40,000 hectares of mangrove that we wish to continuously protect, amidst, development that always aspires to grow. And it's a challenge between economy and conservation and preservation targets. With that, the Ministry of Economy in Fiji is the house of the Climate Change Division, so it ensures we have the right financial partners as well as integration of finance with our environment conservation targets, and in particular with blue carbon ecosystems. And with regards to that, it's not yet landed into our NDCs in very particular or in a very explicit way, but we do reference the conservation of blue carbon ecosystems or ecosystem services in particular. through the National Ocean Policy that we updated in our NDC. So under the NDC, we have a 30% conservation of the marine ecosystem or ocean marine ecosystem, and it ensures that blue carbon ecosystems are part of the marine conservation targets. And then apart from marine protected areas, we're looking at other conservation targets, and that's where blue carbon ecosystems comes in as well. Fiji has a very robust integrated coastal management strategy, so that ties in coastal nature-based solution. So not only looking at mangrove ecosystems, but other interventions that ensure the coastlines are protected as a soft intervention to our adaptation strategies. Now with blue carbon, we work with a lot of partners. Apart from IPBC, we work largely on the Australia Pacific Blue Carbon Program, as well as recently we've signed an agreement with the Carbon Market Institutes based in Australia, and we do hope to partner with the IPCOs in time to come, as announced by DFED in the last COP. So what you learn from Fiji's case is that we are quickly moving away from policy and strategy and conservation targets to blue finance, as well as investment in the blue carbon ecosystem services, because we need to leverage financing and look at blue carbon systems through the finance angle to be able to provide the right benefits when it comes to the conservation target. Fiji is also rapidly growing in terms of development aspirations, which means that our conservation targets are quite in a battle when it comes to economy/environment and climate change. So while we do have a conservation target under our Climate Change Act that ensures that our marine ecosystems are preserved, it needs to be outweighed with the development aspirations. So which means we need to tie the blue economy angle to this, and in doing so, we've been working with Conservation International that's based in Fiji, as well as other partners, to look at how we incentivize as well as drive finance around this area. So that has been forthcoming. We are having recent discussions also with few development partners to look at voluntary carbon markets under Article 6 discussions, offsetting that with development partner agencies to see how the host country can co-benefit when we come to these kind of arrangements. So we are on stage to sign up a few deals, and this will really sort of boost up discussions under Article 6. So it's going to that length. Apart from the current assessments that we are doing, of course, Fiji is apart from mangroves, looking at assessment of sea grasses, and this is working with SARO and Conservation International based in Fiji. So a lot of assessment has been done, a lot of mapping also with the Common Sensing project that is administered through the UK government, and these mapping activities and ensuring that we are on track when it comes to spatial mapping of our mangrove ecosystem ensures that it best informs the MRV systems that we hope to have in place soon. Also, working with the UNEP and other development partners, and under the ICAT project, we hope to ensure that the blue carbon ecosystems land up to be part of our GHG inventory, so that it does help offset and really meet our long-term strategy discussions. And of course, the mangroves for Fiji covers 30% of the entire ecosystem evaluation when it comes to carbon offsetting. So there's huge potential there, and while we want to really conserve that target, we want to ensure that there is trade in to that, and that it really also boosts the awareness we have with the private sector, as well as develop these market mechanisms to allow our more meaningful and tangible discussions around blue carbon ecosystems. And that's sort of the angle in which Fiji is geared up to. Now, apart from the Climate Change Act, we have blue carbon systems mentioned in our National Adaptation Plan, our National Ocean Policy, our long-term emission development strategy, as well as our NBCEP, which is administered by the Ministry of Environment. So these are very important areas of discussions. One thing I'd like to pick up from Angelique's discussion is the need to have the right governance mechanisms. So we do have the same structure. There's Ministry of Environment, there's Forestry, there's Economy with climate change, and there's the Ministry of Ethokay Affairs that looks at land rights when it comes to indigenous people in Fiji. So we are working a lot, and well, while we are trying to work around advocacy, awareness, and consultations, this is already prescribed in the Climate Change Act in terms of land, lease, and property rights. So, landowners are able to sell off, carbon credits under their lease property rights. So that's really well captured under the Act. So governance is very well mainstream, but there is a lot of consultation that needs to be driven around the understanding of conservation versus carbon markets and trades. And with those discussions, Fiji has really signed up a few other partnerships, and what we need to or hope to achieve this year and moving forward is the ability to drive community-driven processes. We've received a lot of requests from community leaders, from government agencies who want to do this kind of trade-off and offset. And really, this is working away from domestic targets, and parties that have a lot of these kind of blue carbon ecosystems can then engage in the whole international platform when it comes to offsetting, GHG emissions. And I think it's in the interest of growing the whole market area as well as the private sector financing. And Fiji sees that to be sort of, a new growing area. And then, of course, while Article 6 discussions are forthcoming, these sort of voluntary market mechanisms will really spike up a lot of interest as well as, solutions in the marine space. And of course, our coastal, wetlands guidelines is something that Fiji is also planning to work towards. With that, I'd like to pass it to the UK, but definitely what we'd like to emphasize from Fiji, and conservation targets and local strategies are good, but what we really need to work on is international partnerships, the right governance mechanism, including local legislation and policies that allow these institutional arrangements to actually be forthcoming, which has to be informed a lot on local consultation and advocacy, and a lot of hard work needs to be put into the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushal. Pew doesn't have work in Fiji, but we watch it closely, and it's striking how that breadth of partnerships, both at the domestic level across government departments, but also with those international actors. And I think one of the key learnings from our perspective is, and I hope we'll hear more about tomorrow in the dialogue, is bridging that financing gap early. It seems that is very close to, if not the top of just about everyone's agenda when we think about making that hop to implementation. Steph, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Pew and Conservation International for convening us for this event, and to you all for your time. It's fantastic to be here. I thought I'd take the opportunity to start by saying a big sort of thank you and a reflection on what the ocean community has achieved at COP26. Very much achievement at COP26 that kind of built on all the efforts of the ocean community, of Chile's leadership, of the first Blue COP the year before, of Fiji's leadership prior to that, the efforts of many on this panel and across the room. And so kind of really just wanted to sort of note that from a UK COP26 presidency, I think some of the sort of real kind of strong sort of reflections we had in terms of kind of what the ocean community achieved was firstly kind of that real kind of recognition within kind of the ambition discussions that climate action is ocean action, and recognising that importance of further action kind of for the ocean, and how we really as a community raise the profile of the ocean, not just at COP26 but over the years. It's been just building and building due to the efforts of so many in this room. So just wanted to recognise that, and of course that commitment to keeping 1.5 alive. Other key kind of outcomes are, of course, the Ocean Dialogue. I'm sure it's what's brought so many of us here to Bonn for the next couple of days. From a UK presidency perspective, we're really looking forward to that, with thanks to sort of the Secretariat for all their work in organising it too. For us, we just really want to make sure it's a successful first dialogue. It's the first of many, and key to that success is going to be kind of the participation of many, hearing from you all, that rich conversation, and hopefully that will focus on ocean action as well. And then the last sort of key kind of reflection for us around the COP26 successes was that really important commitment we feel to strengthening ocean action across the UNFCCC existing architecture. A a lot of devil in the detail there in terms of actually what it means in specifics, but we're really interested to hear in the dialogue tomorrow and then throughout kind of what ocean action really means within the UNFCCC. I was going to focus my sort of time here to say a few words on what's important for the UK in this kind of blue carbon space as a shorthand, focusing on both kind of our domestic approach, but also kind of internationally how we're considering what's important in this space, and sharing with you a little bit of the challenges that we face as the UK and how we're addressing that. I'm by no means the expert on this, but happy to sort of take questions and find some experts to help follow up with that. But was going to just share a flavour of our thinking in the UK around nature, science and financing. So firstly, on nature. So for the UK, we really put nature at the heart of our COP26 presidency, and that was very much reflecting that importance of tackling the climate change and biodiversity sort of loss crisis as two sides of the same coin. And with that, it's also about looking holistically and tackling kind of ocean actions holistically as well. So it's not just blue carbon, but actually thinking about blue carbon habitats in terms of their climate benefits, their biodiversity benefits, benefits to people, and within the climate discussion, it's adaptation, resilience, and mitigation too. So really looking kind of holistically and broadly at this. One really big achievement close to the UK's hearts of COP26 was the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on forests. It was a big achievement for nature, I should say, where we had 140 world leaders coming together representing over 90% of the world's forests with a pledge to reverse biodiversity forest loss by 2030, backed by 14 billion of finance, really critical commitment there. And of course, this includes blue forests and mangroves. Across what we're doing in the UK, we're not just looking at this from a UNFCCC perspective, and I did want to sort of note the importance of the year for the ocean community more broadly. So we need to kind of ensure we achieve those key outcomes across CBD and BBNJ. Hopefully this year we're certainly committed to sort of doing that where we can. And for us in the UK, one key priority across that is that need for the whole of the ocean to be sustainably managed, and within this, that recognition that at least 30% of the ocean by 2030 should have high levels of protection. So for the UK, our focus on that is through our UK-led Global Ocean Alliance, and together with the High Ambition sort of coalition, we're really proud that we've now got 115 members signed up to sort of what we refer to as hashtag 30 by 30, and we certainly welcome more to come on board with that, and hopefully successful negotiations throughout this year. Domestically, when it comes to our approach to sort of climate change and the marine environment, we're all about taking that holistic approach to looking how we can integrate climate change considerations into what we're doing. So one example, there are many, but one key example is how we're approaching this through our network of marine protected areas. So across the UK, we now have 38% of our waters protected. That for us covers the majority of our salt marsh and seagrass habitats, 91 and 96% estimates respectively. But our focus is now on really making sure those MPA networks are properly protected and effectively managed, and we recognise there are challenges there. We are also now committed to piloting and designating more highly protected marine areas, and within that, including focus on blue carbon to really ensure we can more highly protect areas to give the ocean for that chance for full recovery to sort of its natural state. So MPAs, HPMAs are one key example for us in the UK in terms of how we're tackling this challenge, how we're looking to protect our blue carbon stocks. That's very much a protection kind of angle. I would just quickly sort of note there's the sort of restoration, there's the more effective management side of things as well. Certainly thinking about some of our historic losses, restoration is going to be key too. That's the nature focus. On science, so the science tells us we're in the critical decade for action. I'm not going to sort of preach and quote the stats to you. You all know them. It's also that critical decade with the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. From a UK perspective, we're really committed to supporting that, but also really actually ensuring that we've got that robust evidence base to support our ocean actions, kind of our policy and our development. So that's the science, kind of all disciplines of science, that's kind of all of society being part of that and at every level to really get that better understanding of the impacts of climate change on the ocean through to kind of understanding the best solutions. Blue carbon is a great example for us of some of the scientific challenges that we faced and how we're approaching this in a collaborative way. For the UK, we've got a really complex situation when it comes to our blue carbon evidence base. We've got data gaps that really actually hinder us in terms of robustly including our kind of blue carbon into our UK greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That's sort of spatial habitat data. It's about better understanding stocks and accumulations and historic data as well to inform the sort of target setting. We're really putting our efforts into that, but we've also got to sort of put this into context, and for us in the UK, it's about a proportionate approach to recognising that actually for the UK, when it comes to sort of the IPCC kind of wetlands guidelines on salt marsh and seagrass, our sort of accumulation rates are relatively small, and so we're just looking at how we get the right balance with our approach. We have also some real evidence challenges when it comes to actually our understanding of the human impact on our sort of marine environment. Key examples are our sort of stocks, our sediments, and the impacts of various activities on the seafloor. And again, it's an area that we really need to sort of enhance our understanding on to think about how we approach. And thirdly, and I'll keep it to the top three, there's a recognition that, especially when it comes to blue carbon habitats, we actually need to better understand the current and future risks of those habitats to future climate change. So getting slightly circular there, I understand, but there's a lot that we need to sort of further learn and explore. From a UK perspective, this is why we've now kind of created a new UK Blue Carbon Evidence Partnership working across the UK to try and better advance our evidence base to support our policy. And then globally, under the UK presidency of the G7, we put a real spotlight on how we want to work with the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and in particular to enhance international collaboration under the G7, but also internationally and more broadly. And I'm really pleased to share with you kind of one example in the blue carbon space where just last week we welcomed the IOC endorsing what's called Go BC. It's a new global ocean decade programme for blue carbon. So it's a programme under the decade that the UK is proud to support, led by the University of St Andrews, together with key partners across the Blue Carbon Initiative and the International Partnership on Blue Carbon. And the focus of that new programme is going to be to really better understand the evidence around the ocean climate nature nexus, and to really think about how it can generate new knowledge and share that knowledge and find better solutions to the combined climate and biodiversity challenges. Much more details to come on that later this month at the the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon. Last quick area I'm going to just touch on is, for us, the importance of finance. Obviously, within these rules, there's that recognition of broader finance flows as well as climate finance, the 100 billion. Within that, an appropriate reflection of nature, and within that still, but also broader, the importance of ocean financing and recognising that when it comes to ocean financing, it's a relatively small share still that supports the ocean, and in particular, I think it's the least funded of the SDGs. From a UK, one key activity for us in this space is around our new UK Blue Planet Fund. So we've recently launched a new fund. It's £500 million for activities to support the marine environment and also poverty alleviation. It's finance, it's also development cooperation in terms of working with partners to better understand their needs and where sort of protection of blue carbon through kind of work on both climate change and biodiversity is a key focus. I'm going to just very briefly touch on blue carbon markets, and just to very much say, I think it's a great example that cuts across both the kind of the nature, science and finance challenges. It's all very new and nascent. It's going to be really important to get right in terms of the science and that robust accounting, and also important to get right in terms of the right incentives, recognising the whole variety of benefits that blue carbon habitats can offer and what we want to incentivise. So it's not just about mitigation per se, but it's about the whole variety of benefits, both for people and the planet. So to sort of sum up there, kind of from us, from COP26 presidency, kind of we're really thankful to the ocean community for last year. Key focus for us going forward is going to be on sort of nature, science, finance, supporting implementation, and I think a key element of that is going to be the partnerships and the collaborations that we can foster to really help advance that. And I'm going to end there. Thank you. Thanks,
Steph. And I think a fitting point to end on, because our next speaker is pretty well versed in how we broker some of these partnerships. Joachim, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for the invite and for the opportunity to be here, and everyone for being here at this late time. So I will start very briefly just giving an overview of what the NDC partnership is. I imagine there are several colleagues here in the room, but probably some people are not very familiar. So the partnership was formed in 2016, so just after the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015, the discussion started. Basically, a group of countries, both developed and developing countries, and also institutions working on environment, sustainable development, and climate, came together saying, okay, now we have a mechanism in place. We have the NDCs where countries can come up with their own objectives, their own commitments, and this is going to drive our discussions on climate in the next years to come. So we need, as a community, to come basically together and provide the support, especially looking at the developing countries, that they need to advance in this journey. So the way that the partnership is structured is we are led by countries, and we are a country-driven initiative. So we have both developed and developing countries. We are now at 200 members. 119 of those are countries, and 80 are institutions that work providing support on several topics. And those include multilateral development banks, UN agencies, NGOs, so several organizations that are providing already support in this space. And there are a few principles that the partnership tries to promote. So a few of them is to see climate as part of development, not see it as a separate agenda. So promoting this whole of society, whole of government approach, and bringing together climate to a way that it makes sense to the different sectors and meet them where they are in terms of their approach. The other one is to look into mitigation, of course, because we need to reduce emissions, but also, as we work a lot with developing countries, providing support to adaptation and resilience building, because we already, in any scenario, we already need to adapt and to be prepared for that. And making then a linkage. So the way that we work basically is we engage with the countries. We work currently in more than 80 developing countries. We engage them. We have a process, a country engagement strategy, where we engage the different ministries. Then we collect the needs and the priorities that they have, and then we bring back to the community, the development partners, institutional partners, to provide the support for that. So that just to provide a quick framing, and I think there are several entry points that relate a lot to when you talk about blue carbon and the relevance of the topic. So I think one of the key points there is that there is a clear entry point for an holistic approach. So when we are talking about blue carbon, we are talking about mitigation, but we are talking for several countries about adaptation as a critical component. And also we are talking about development, because a lot of the livelihoods and like a lot of the economy for several countries rely a lot on oceans. So in that concept and in that context is a key topic in terms of the work we are doing. The way we operate is not as a, let's say, an advocacy organization, but we collect the needs of the countries and we respect those needs. And one of the things that we've been observing is, like, especially when we started with the first NDC to now the revision of the NDCs, and we supported several countries in that process, there was a substantial increase in the number of countries that are looking into this topic and requesting support. So to date, We have 29 countries that requested support to the partnership on blue carbon and oceans and coastal protection. That boils down to 128 specific requests. We have 41 partners that are supporting, so from our network that are providing the support to those areas. And looking a little bit in terms of like the evolution, what we see there is as we move along the process of working on revising the NDC, and we support several countries in putting together NDC implementation plans and then moving to the implementation of those, we see an increased number of requests and like a scope of work in there. So that's a natural evolution that we are seeing a lot across the countries. In terms of the specific topics and what they are looking in terms of focus, so 50% of the requests are looking into adaptation with a very strong component on disaster risk reduction. 41% looking into cross-cutting, so they are seeing from both an adaptation and a mitigation angle at the same time, and 9% that are solely focused on mitigation. So I think that also brings back that point of like really having this holistic and integrated approach to climate action. When it comes to the type of support that we are seeing, I think there's also, as we have several members in different stages in terms of their engagement in this topic and awareness, but what we see a very strong focus on like very early stage studies and analysis to understand what are the stocks that they have in terms of carbon, map what are the relevant ecosystems, understand the drivers that are out there in terms of reducing or like losing these ecosystems, but also a lot of interest in terms of understanding the value that these ecosystems can provide in terms of adaptation and reducing risks of disasters. So really trying to map, understand, and quantify both from a mitigation perspective, but also from an adaptation perspective. And we see that that's very interesting because that is the first thing that you need when you are starting to engage in different levels of government, when you go high up in terms of like the governance structures, is really trying to being able to articulate the benefits and why we are talking about this topic. Then a second component that we see that is coming like usually after that is looking into the strategies and plans. So what are the specific strategies? What are the priorities? What are the interventions that the country is seeing across this different, depending on like the results of the first phases, and then putting those in place to engage the different stakeholders and work with them. And I think a lot of was mentioned in terms of the importance of bringing several government institutions, but also several stakeholders that are out there sharing these ecosystems to understand their priorities, understand their perspectives, and be sure that you are putting a plan that is realistic to be implementable afterwards. Then one of the most requested areas of support is on finance, and basically in there we have a few components. So the first one is really to develop and put together concept notes and bankable proposals. So understanding what is out there in terms of funding opportunities and preparing projects that can be getting finance from the different financing sources that you have and basically moving along that process. There is one of the things that we see that's a lot of work needed, because if you are looking for a specific, let's say the GCF or JEF, a little bit easier, but like usually are proposals that take 2-3 years to get kind of matured and get ready, so it's a lot of work in that. And when we are talking also about private sector or different types of interventions, there's also a lot of work to be done, because there are tons of good ideas, but up to a point that you identify an idea, you work on the pre-feasibility studies, the feasibility studies, the project finance, up to a point that you can go to an investor, that's also a lot of work. So the way that the partnership works as well is trying to support countries as we get this request, finding the right partners that can provide them the support in that particular stage so they can advance towards financing and towards the implementation of all these commitments. And then two other areas that we see, like not as prominent as the first ones that I mentioned. One is on monitoring and reporting and evaluating, even though there is a lot of focus on understanding, assessing, mapping. But I see most of the countries are still in this early stage, but there's already some interest in understanding how they are going to monitor, how they're going to include into their frameworks for measure, report, and verify their emissions. And another topic also that is emerging and very common as well is on capacity building. So basically bringing the skills, bringing the knowledge to different stakeholders. We see a few very knowledgeable stakeholders in countries, but that's a knowledge that usually is very concentrated, and there is an interest and appetite to also bring that to other institutions within the government and also beyond that. Then just, I think, a few examples that I would like to give in terms of the work that we've been doing in a few countries that are looking into this topic. So when it comes to the first stage, or the mapping, the studies, the assessments, Mexico is, for example, looking to establish a blue carbon baseline in coastal ecosystems. So that was work that was done requested to the partnership, and we have a partner providing support, the World Resources Institute. Also in Panama, they are looking into creating a framework for blue carbon accounting, ensuring that wetlands and seagrass reserves are considered also as part of their NDCs and their climate action and their contributions to the Paris Agreement. In Pakistan, we have two components that they were looking. First was on mapping, understanding, and quantifying at the first stage what is the stock that they have in terms of carbon, what are the priorities, but now they are also looking in terms of like how they can finance those interventions and how can create mechanisms for that. Then moving more towards the part of like the project financing. So we have a few countries, so São Tomé and Príncipe, Mozambique, Benin, they are looking in terms of putting together concept notes and project proposals to be able to implement those projects. So there is a combination there of looking into bilateral cooperation, looking into multilateral funds, and basically devising this strategies and these projects to work on coastal protection is a very relevant topic for these countries. And also looking in terms of resilience for the fisheries sector, that is, they see a lot of impacts and potential risks there as well. So I think I would stop there, but basically I think the idea is what we've been noticing is that one is an increase in terms of like interest from the countries, interest in understanding the topic, increase in terms of considering that as both a mitigation adaptation strategy, usually jointly, but also a very strong focus on preparing projects and getting finance to be able to move to implementation. Okay.
Thank you, Joaquin. I think it's fascinating, also pretty representative of the broader discussion that these ecosystems are fittingly labelled blue carbon because of their fantastic ability to sequester and store carbon, but born out of the partnerships that you're seeing, and importantly how to make them most effective is properly understanding the valuation, right? So the blue carbon piece is not in many instances the primary motivation for countries. It's DRR, it's adaptation, it's resilience values. And in terms of constructing the best partnerships, it's important to get that valuation right up front. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good evening, everybody. I don't even know how long this side event is, so tell me how long I have to...
We have a little time.
Because I'm the last panelist, I feel I can carry on for a while. Good evening, everybody. Anybody in the room a juggler? Does anybody juggle? No? Nobody juggles? No balls? Between jobs? Kids? A long time ago, when I was a student, I was in the Juggling Society at my university in my island, which is the same one as Stephanie's. And I was juggling 3 balls. I never managed more, unfortunately. They always landed on the floor. But then I joined, many years later, I joined the UNFCCC, and I have been and still am leading the research and systematic observation work here. But I also liaise quite closely with the IPCC. But I also added a third ball to that mix a few years ago, which was based off of the mandate or the explanation of the climate system in the convention. And that third ball, of course, is strengthened ocean climate action. But what it's worth mentioning, and easier question, anybody read the Paris Agreement? Anyone read the convention? Jesse, I see some hands. Okay, this is going better than it did a week ago when I was in a different side of it. So if you read either the convention or the Paris Agreement, there is a very boring part to it, which is the definitions part. And it explains what the climate system is in that definition. And the Paris Agreement uses the same definition as the convention, which explains that we are a system. We are not just the atmosphere. So we are a system working across land, 3 things, land, ocean, and atmosphere. And then, of course, the biosphere is a part of that as well. So there's another 3 there. And then, so I've got my 3 balls. I've got my 3 kids as well. I juggle as well as my job. Although one's left home, so easier to slightly juggle now. And we have our 3 blue carbon ecosystems, which is extremely important. But what's interesting also on the UNFCCC is the Paris Agreement, of course, has 3 key parts to Article 2, which is keeping 1.5 alive. Let's call it that. I hate it when people call it a target. Let's not call it a 2 degrees target ever again. Otherwise, I have my eye on all of you. Because it's a limit to 1.5. We also have the adaptation part, 2B. We also have the finance part, which is 2C. There's long, complicated words to that, but I've had a glass of wine, so I'll leave it at that. So it's very important that we have this strange separation, I suppose, in the FCCC process to talk about mitigation, adaptation, and finance. But nobody works like that. Does anybody go out and think, I think I'll not use the car today because I feel a bit of mitigation, and then I'm going to sort of adapt to the temperature by... Actually, if you're in Bonn in the last week, I got completely drenched because I didn't adapt to the fact that it was sunny in the morning and raining in the afternoon. So, and then, of course, we've got the finance conversations, and they're all really weirdly sort of separated in our process into different agenda items. And then, of course, you have the support. Everything has to be based on the best available science, which is my other part of my job. So yes, we have this sort of conversations going on at international level that, as Tom knows, working at national level, and Kushal and Angelique also knows, it's not really a conversation you have at that level. So we have this very weird, interesting situation where we have to provide guidance. Of course, the Paris Agreement is there, and we all don't want to work between... so everyone's sort of thinking, what are we going to do at COP27 this year? But actually, what we have is the Paris Agreement, which is saying, well, actually, by 2050, we need to be net zero, we need to be fully adapted, and all the finance, the 20 billion a year, should be fully flowing, and everybody should be, not just business as usual, but resilient net zero society. And actually, if we stop worrying about, the doom and gloom, which a lot of people try and do, and actually try and focus on that and then have clear stepping stones to get there, then I think we might actually end up doing a little bit more than we do at the minute. That might not be a secretary point of view, but again, I stress that I have had a glass of wine and no food today. So, So yes, so actually we have this vision of the Paris Agreement that we all want. We have this resilient society. We have these ecosystems that we certainly want to preserve, not just because they're beautiful and wonderful, and I have yet to be in a mangrove forest. So yes, I know, shocking. I have been to Fiji though, so I saw them from the air. But we want to find a way to match what are we doing at international level to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement with protecting these beautiful ecosystems, but making sure that it's the value and is recognized and the funding is there to protect them. So this is really this sort of weird systemic story that we're all trying to find along this lovely panel. So from my point of view, we have to find a way to observe and research this. We have colleagues working very hard on the UN Decade work, as Steph mentioned, to really aim at 100% observed research ocean that can provide us the information we need for these. We have to find a way for countries to actually, I've put the pin on already, so, it's sort of, actually, I haven't got my glasses on, but climate change is ocean change. I think all of us have used that in one presentation or another in the last few years. And climate finance is ocean finance. You need 2 pins. So we need countries to blue their NDCs. So even landlocked countries need to blue their NDCs. So 100% blue NDCs. We need to get countries to recognize that involves mitigation and adaptation, and blue carbon obviously straddles both of those conversations. And also, as Angelique said, we need to measure, report, verify, so that under the Paris Agreement, it's not just NDCs are saying what you want to do, but then obviously countries have to do them, and then they have to report on what they've done. And in order to do that, they need to be able to measure, report, and verify. And then, of course, when you get to the global stock take, you have this aggregated way of saying, right, at global level, how are we doing? Well, we all know we're not doing enough yet. We only have to read a UNEP gap report to see that. And then, of course, the other part of that is that we have countries need to be enabled to protect those ecosystems, which is Pew is doing a lot of, and we're very grateful. And in order to be part of that conversation of net zero, but not to oversell the fact that, you can't just preserve your blue carbon ecosystems and expect that Paris Agreement will be resolved. It's basically be reminded and go away and say blue carbon ecosystems are great, but please reduce your fossil fuel emissions. So I think I was at my son's parents' evening a few weeks ago, and they have this great scheme at their school where you sort of like write down 2 aims and a wish when you see what their report is doing. Fortunately, quite well, I have to say. So I thought. Rather than bore you with sort of the details of the UNFCCC work, and by the way, a lot of that we'll cover in the Ocean Dialogue tomorrow. So again, I have your names, and I'll see you all in that room tomorrow at 3:00. We really want to actually, before I finish, encourage you to participate in the dialogue, which means either speak and engage, and all of the information is on the website. And please think about some of these issues. How do we strengthen at national level? How do we enable? How do we make 100% blue NDCs? How do we support these blue carbon ecosystems as part of this bigger story? This bigger, it's one ball of not just 3, but probably many. In terms of responding to the Paris Agreement. And we have to also understand, the constraints within that conversation. So really, tomorrow, please engage. Please come to speak or to type, because we'll also have a Mentimeter conversation is going on in parallel to the panelists. And I know Tom is one of my panelists, so you have to come. But also Kushal, and then Angelique will be chairing. So sorry, Stephanie and Joachim. Please participate in the dialogue tomorrow. But I guess moving forward, my 2 aims and a wish, sort of my parent teacher, sort of, if you sit me down and ask me that, would be, really we have to build a conversation where 100% blue NDCs, 100% blue Paris Agreement within the context of mitigation and adaptation and the ability to measure, report and verify that. The second one is obviously, of course, countries need to be enabled to do that, to blue their NDCs, which part of that is, of course, to protect the ecosystems. Part of that is to be able to have the information to do their GHG inventories that the IPCC wetland supplement very confusingly identifies, and there's a lot of capacity building needed there to help countries, inventory their blue carbon. There's opportunities perhaps with other ecosystems, but there's also a lot of research and observation still to be done for that. So we know it's not a silver bullet for mitigation, and that I think is very clear. And then a wish really is from where I'm sitting, I suppose. We have this great mandate from Glasgow. It's a start, it's not an end. It's a process. Mandate is a mandate for all parts of the work streams under the FCCC to integrate ocean in their work. And then, of course, we have this annual dialogue. So it's an ask. But I think that we have to move deeper in that and say, well, actually, what are those goals within that context, and how do we identify them? And I think that is really, there's the opportunity with the dialogue moving forward to have a series of stepping stones. Perhaps the next one we could dive deep into blue carbon, for example. Perhaps the one after that we talk a lot more about green shipping zones. So there is this yearly opportunity to really deep dive moving forward, and I think we can just think about it within our complicated process, how to make that conversation happen as easily as possible. But then to also message out, have this dialogue to really message out what's needed and bring that to parties' attention every year at COP. That really helps us strive towards strengthening ocean climate action and ocean climate finance. And with that, I will pass the floor back to my good friend Tom, whose kids are a lot younger than mine. Although I don't see any grey hairs yet, so obviously there's still time for that.
They're coming,
Pass the floor
fear
to you.
not. And I've not yet juggled them, although... just to be crystal clear, the Pew Charitable Trust does not condone juggling children, just to be... and thank you. I think we're all very enthused and care and informed about these particular ecosystems, but it does bear reiterating that these places sequester and store carbon fantastically. When they are degraded, they emit carbon. But when we're speaking about the ocean writ large, from a climate standpoint, the greatest contribution we can make is to make those emission reductions. It's not, it has not, and it should not be positioned as an alternative to doing that. Our lovely panel all have pressing demands, but I'm really hoping they've got time for Q&A, if possible. And I'm going to open it up to the floor. Lady in the green jacket.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lucola. I'm part of a youth NGO called Care About Climate, and I'm part of the NDC team. So we analyze NDCs through a gender, youth, and indigenous perspective. And my colleagues from Fijis in my NGO analyze Fiji NDCs. And one quarter of Fiji's population are under 15, and another quarter are between 15 to 29 years old, meaning almost half of your population is classified by the UN as youth. However, there is no specific effort in your NDCs and enhanced NDCs to include youth participation. Neither indigenous people. Gender is mentioned, but no specific methods of inclusion. When we know that these groups are disproportionately affected by climate change, but also the best agents of change because they are at the front line of this climate change. I wanted to know if you've made any progress in including more of this community. And to come back on the 30% of the ocean that has to be protected by 2030, we do know that overfishing is a huge issue. Some scientific studies have been made during 4 years explaining that if we continue on this trend of overfishing we see today, our oceans will be almost empty in 2050, maybe a little bit later, especially because ocean is a huge carbon sink, so this is a very important issue. And a study has been made by the Global Fishing Watch showing that more than 90% of Britain offshore marine protected areas are still being bottom trawled, which is the most destructive type of fishing. In 2001, 50 of the 64 offshore marine protected areas were still being fished with that practice, which severely limits the seabed ability to store carbon. So I wanted to know what is your take on this, because maritime protected areas where there is still fishing, especially bottom trawling fishes, is pretty much greenwashing. And the last question, as we know...
Sorry, I'm going to limit you to two.
Okay.
So first question on the representation of the NDC process to Fiji, and then to MPA management with the UK.
Thank you. With regards to NDC, of course, our updated NDC focused a lot in terms of including ocean actions. So not explicitly blue carbon, as I mentioned, but we put in under adaptation 30% of our marine protected areas target by 2030. That's now captured in the Climate Change Act. So that has been the effort, and of course, we keep revising these commitments. The next one will largely focus on agriculture and the follow sector. That is a key priority right now in terms of GHG emissions, and definitely gender is a key one. But we have not focused that on the NDCs because we are now working a lot more on that at the domestic front. So gender is now action through our Climate Change Act as well as our GESI policy, or the Gender and Environment and Social Inclusivity policy, that is part of our NDA accreditation process. So we've mainstreamed gender into all our policy interventions in Fiji through that, as an also requirement we've put forward to our GCF accreditation process, as well as we have trialed gender mainstream budgeting in 9 government ministries. So it's very much at the domestic upfront now, including an upcoming Gender Act, as well as putting forward gender action strategy through the Ministry of Women and Poverty Alleviation. So it's rightfully at that level, with the NDC focus, of course, on oceans. We've sort of been doing that, and as well as agriculture that's upcoming. So it's more strategic at this level. And gender, of course, rightfully is also part of the Climate Change Act. The new national ocean policy that we have put forward has a separate goal under advocacy that focuses on youth leadership empowerment, as well as youth education, so formal, non-formal, and the informal sector, and that's how we've sort of envisioned to put forward a lot of these youth-based actions and activities, including a lot of domestic projects that focus on community-based interventions. And the Ministry of Youth in Fiji is been leading a lot of advocacy around that. So it's more of a programmatic shift at this time before we take it to the NDC, but definitely a lot of reform has happened recently, including a lot of TA work with the ADB that we presented in Manila recently in the gender workshop. And then, of course, it continues to be a priority. In a lot of our national ocean policy and other policies, you'll see 50-50 representatives from gender-based background, and a lot of disability sort of inclusivity with vulnerability has also been emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question in terms of sort of the challenges of sort of fishing and marine protection. It's it's a topic that we discuss a lot within UK government, and I'm sure in other governments too. And the challenge is, how do you kind of balance off and trade off many different uses of the sea and perspectives, and it's something we're continuously kind of thinking about, working on, as well as really thinking about where we are, where we need to be, and how do we get there as well. In the UK, we now have our sort of network of MPAs, and the sort of the positioning now is to really focus on that effective management of them, recognising we're not there yet fully. We've recently introduced new bylaws to sort of tackle some of the fishing sort of challenges, and from a UK perspective, now that we're an independent coastal state, that's also something that we're looking at most recently with our new Fisheries kind of Act and powers within that as well. So it's conversation that's been had. It's conversation that we have to have with all stakeholders and all users, and just to sort of balance that off. But it's certainly an important one, and also where we need to get that evidence as well to help inform the best approach going forward. So really important question, and something we're certainly, well, colleagues of mine are certainly actively considering.
Thanks, Steph. Gentleman at the front.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dixon Warwinge for the Nairobi Convention, and the wine has done more damage to me than you probably. I'll still ask a question. I think Joachim and Joanne most captured my dilemma. Communication to stakeholders. How do you communicate to stakeholders? 30 by 30, why? Why 30 and why 30 by 30? And how do you communicate to the frontier communities? That's where action is required. But that's where the language of carbon market, voluntary carbon market, or carbon credits is barely understood. But that's where we want action. So if you're not working, and most of us are not, working for dugongs or turtles, we do not even understand seagrass. Seagrass beds, and that terminology has been around for long, nor probably don't even understand mangroves, and it has been there for long. So when we introduce these new languages, or new language, without a way to decipher or communicate even better, then we are losing those that must act, or we are delaying so that those that must act will wait longer before they act because they do not understand what we are talking about. So the question is, how can we make the language used by experts more mainstream? Because that is what's required. The government officials that attend UNFCCC meetings are the only ones who understand what's a carbon credit, what's a voluntary carbon market. But those who must take decisions don't understand that language. How do we make that language easily understandable at the frontier of action with the communities?
Great question. Angelique.
No, that's a great question, and I've shared the story about already about just the importance of connecting language to the local community and how that's one way of bringing them along on the journey. I think you were there with regards to finding a Seychelles Creole name for seagrass by the local communities themselves, and it did not involve us sort of walking to the fishers with the scientific name of these ecosystems, but with pictures. What do you usually call it? And I think I'm sorry to say this for those of us who have been here for a long time, but we kind of operate in a bubble. I had this really interesting conversation where someone said to me, and I hadn't even realized this, I was speaking to a finance person, and they said, you use the word markets like they do in the UNFCCC. And I thought, oh, he's understanding something else when he uses the term markets. And I had the same conversation with the scientists, explaining to her the issue with the use of the word markets. And she said, well, when I hear the word markets, I think about the place where you go buy fruits and vegetables. So it was really making the point that we need to bridge this language gap. But I also think that we also need to task ourselves in thinking, do the local communities really need to learn about the words that we use? Because sometimes, and gender is one of those things, those areas where we talk about gender mainstreaming, gender responsiveness, gender blindness, but sometimes actions are being taken, but they're just not being labeled in the same way that experts are using them in the UNFCCC process. So I do wonder how we do bridge that gap, and that's probably your question, and I'm not answering it. But certainly, we need to take it, we need to take it closer to the ground, and I think we need to sort of poke the bubble and welcome the local communities to inform us about what's the most effective ways of communicating it as well. I think that would definitely be one of my advices, going back to the communities that we all serve and understanding their perspective and then communicating in the best way that would help them. And with regards to the issue of reaching decision makers, also very critical, because that's different language as well. That's almost the language of economics and voting and voters votes during an election cycle, and thinking about how we communicate. Not a straightforward answer, but I hope something there. Thanks.
Joanna?
I can take that. Hi, Dixon. And we were on a panel a couple of weeks ago talking similar things for an SDG 14 meeting. We have this, like I said, we are at this sort of like international level, and the UNFCCC secretariat is a secretariat for the decision-making bodies. We're not an implementing agency like UNEP, like FAO, like others that even across the UN that are sort of like have offices in countries and are working with local communities. So this is why I've made a lot of friends with the OSHA community, really, because it's really trying to get these messages out to those people that then can communicate it. So it's not, you have to think holistically. Certainly from the FCCC perspective, I think there's opportunities to develop training materials that really could help with some of these conversations in the languages in which they would help. And I'm sure the Nairobi Convention possibly does some of this already. But it is, a recognition certainly, and this is something that I've worked quite strongly on developing the conversations with the first Ocean Dialogue, which was mandated in Chile, Madrid, and then now the first one mandated from Glasgow, to try and start breaking down these silos and looking at some of these issues, institutional ones, and really trying to think how, not just what is going on, but how do we then move the needle forward to bring these conversations at the right level to the right people, and bearing in mind that we have a sort of system approach we need to think about, especially with the ocean, when you've got such a complicated arena where so many actors are working in this space. So, and on the issue of acronyms, just a funny story, because again, wine. When last year, some of you know this, I think, we were talking about getting an ocean dialogue out of the Glasgow COP. We were laughing about the fact that we could actually call it the Glasgow Ocean Dialogue, and then you'd have the perfect acronym, but then that might be a bit polarizing if you're asking people to come to God. So so we're just sticking with Ocean Dialogue for now, or Ocean Climate Change Dialogue to give it its long name. Anyway, back to you, Tom.
Stage 2. We have time for one more question. Lady at the front.
Hi, my name is Sandra Prüfer. I live here in Bonn, but I lived also in other places of the world, including Northwest Alaska. And I worked there in journalism, but also for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Now, because I can talk fish, and there is native knowledge, indigenous knowledge about the ocean. And there's also traditional harvesting of kelp. And so the native people there, they really, they know that this is beneficial, and there's now also, they're developing kind of like a kelp farming system. This food production is, creating in these coastal communities additional income. And it was great that you had the reception, before this meeting, because I could talk to, some people from Africa and Argentina, and I was asking them, okay, is this also harvested there? And we talked, and it's in Zanzibar, it's in Argentina. So when you engage, because you here only talking about conserving this ecosystem, but if the local community also sees a benefit, and this creating income, not much, but additional income. I think that would be great. And it's also good for food production and so on. So is this part of your concerns in this ocean dialogue? Working with local communities, indigenous communities, and then become basically person that also benefiting from this.
I'm happy to have a go at that one, if it helps. So I think one of the key learnings from the projects we've been involved in is that, much as Dixon just remarked now, is that these ecosystems have a fitting label as blue carbon because of their sequestration storage capacity, but that is not the most, always the most relevant value to the users and local communities. And when you think about management schemes, when you think about financial incentives to implement either those conservation or restoration measures, they have to be tailored to those values. So yes, I think is the short answer is, it's a very appropriate and very fitting label for these ecosystems in this place. But as we think about implementation and we think about scale, recognition of those uses and those values extend far beyond carbon, certainly from our experience. I don't know if Kushal or anyone else from the panel would like to add to that.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to talk about Fiji's case study, even with MPA. So what we have in the indigenous community from time immemorial is the labeling of rivers, lakes, and oceans as taboo zones. So there are certain areas in time when there is no fishing completely, and they call it the taboo. And these are very traditional fishing rights that are owned in Fiji by traditional landowners, and that concept was transcribed into what's called now the locally managed marine area, or LMMAs. And this has become like a huge network of coastal zone management in Fiji when it comes to fisheries protection, and it operates now with a funding arrangement. So local communities are able to fund some of this marine protection area. So it's slightly different from a fully protected area, but there's this indigenous concept that already exists. And we use a lot of community consultations when we're driving the national ocean policy to relate to these existing mechanisms to talk about the 30% marine protected areas. And really, I think, this is what we have to do, is to tie in at the very implementation. And we're now working with other partners such as the Wade Foundation to also ensure that there's a translation of the National Ocean Policy, at least the key objectives, in vernacular. And when we do this, we use very high-level community leadership. So, using village heads, using chiefs or rokotuis that we call in Fiji, to be able to champion these initiatives at the local community level. And that really works. So there's a sort of channeling or development opportunities that we have from here into the communities, and it's very important that we do that. My minister, for example, is a lawyer by profession as well, so he's very well articulated the need to provide clarity in terms of definitions and how we work around that, and then to ensure we translate the same into local language and at the community when we drive these kind of policies and legislation. And so Fiji, these policies and legislations can take a minimum of 3 years before it's finalized, because we go out to all the village communities and ensure that we are able to translate that using local examples and language. And Seychelles is another example in terms of putting that in a vernacular vocabulary. So Fiji has done similarly, and I think this is the way to work around in terms of local implementation. And of course, this is the arrangement we have globally, and we just have to do the due diligence in ensuring that we implement it accordingly. Thank you.
I did say, forgive me for the focus on the Seychelles, but another example from there is 3 or 4 years before the government and Pew and all the other partners came along and talked about blue carbon, there was a community of fishers on the second biggest island, Praslin, that had already appreciated and knew the importance of seagrass meadows as nursery grounds for a commercial fish species that they benefited the most from. And they, in fact, started their own voluntary fishing closure zones on a seasonal basis. This was an initiative led by the fishers, designed by the fishers, because they had identified that there was a problem that they needed to address, and they came up with these voluntary fishing closures. And there are many beautiful stories around this initiative, including that it was all voluntary. So the fishers, agreed amongst themselves. They had a little charter, they signed it, and they agreed not to fish there. And what was interesting is that 1 or 2 fishers went rogue. Of course, 1 or 2 fishers went rogue, but when they attempted to sell this particular fish species at the market, the consumers wouldn't buy it, because they had all been educated about why this initiative was ongoing. So when SECAT, the government of Seychelles, turned up and said, these have amazing blue carbon value, they were already happy to engage on this because they already knew the resilience and adaptation value. So it was really an add-on as opposed to a new value that they were appreciating. This was very context-specific to this local community, but definitely, I think, worth appreciating that some of these benefits are appreciated well before governments are thinking about updating NDCs. Thanks.
Thank you, Angelique. We are running over time, which, as my team will tell you, happens pretty much every time I chair or moderate a call. So it leaves me only to extend a very, very big thank you to our excellent panel. I know all of us in the room are looking forward to the dialogue, but also to next steps beyond that. Would certainly encourage you to continue the conversation outside the room. I don't know if there is any more wine, but please try. And would just appreciate it if you'd join me thanking our panel.
I feel like we've been in the spotlight. like that has been blinding me. Yeah.